welcome to the show. I'm Megyn Kelly, and I want to begin with two words. I'm sorry. You may have heard that yesterday we had a discussion here about political correctness and Halloween costumes. And that conversation turned to whether it is ever okay for a person of one race to dress up as another. A black person making their face lighter or a white person making theirs darker to make a costume complete. I defended the idea, saying as long as it was respectful and part of a Halloween costume, it seemed okay. Well, I was wrong, and I am sorry. One of the great parts of sitting in this chair each day is getting to discuss different points of view. Sometimes I talk and sometimes I listen. And yesterday I learned. I learned that given the history of blackface being used in awful ways by racists in this country, it is not okay for that to be part of any costume, Halloween or otherwise. I have never been a PC kind of person, but I do understand the value in being sensitive to our history, particularly on race and ethnicity. This past year has been so painful for many people of color. The country feels so divided, and I have no wish to add to that pain and offense. I believe this is a time for more understanding, more love, more sensitivity, and honor. And I want to be part of that. Thank you for listening and for helping me listen too. Thank you. Joining me now, co-host of PBS's In Principle, Amy Holmes, and host of the digital show, Roland Martin Unfiltered, Roland Martin. I love you guys, so thank you so much for that. Love you, too. Thank you both for being here. You know, it's not an easy discussion, but Roland, I did listen yesterday, and what was very clear in what I read and what I heard is that the history here, when it comes to that term and this issue, is deeply disturbing.
I think the problem is, for African Americans, we know the history, and too many white Americans don't know or won't accept it. When the reality is, it is American history, yours and mine. When you look at blackface, white entertainers wore blackface to mimic African Americans, to caricature African Americans. When you look at the minstrel shows, black entertainers were forced to wear blackface because whites did not even want to see the humanity of black people, so therefore they had blackface. Last night, I looked at Spike Lee's 2000 movie Bamboozled, which dealt with this. And they actually, the Jada Pinkett Smith character actually talked about exactly how they created it. And what they did was they poured alcohol on 2 corks, burned it to a crisp, mashed it to a powder, added water, and mixed it to a thick paste, and then applied it to the faces of black people. Then they would take red lipstick and put it on the lips, but then on the outside of the lips to create this image. But this thing went beyond just that. You look at the Jim Crow Museum that's at Ferry State University, where this is American history, where black people have been assaulted in magazines, television, radio, all of these images that have continued for centuries and then, of course, decades, going up to the 1960s and to some degree in the 70s, and we still see it present day. And so this is American history. The problem is too many of us grew up learning his story and not actual history. And that's the problem that we have to accept. And when we are grown, when we are educated, we have to go beyond what we were taught, what we learned in our households, and say, I better be fully aware of real American history as opposed to being in denial about what actually took place in this country.
Mm-hmm. And the other piece of it is that seeing a white person darken her skin, even for a costume, today evokes that past.
Well, absolutely it does. It does, because you're speaking to, again, the history. Look, if you want to dress up like James Earl Jones and come into America, somebody sent me a photo, you can put the costume on. You don't have to darken your face. We have to deal with also the reality of colorism in this country, that the American beauty standard since we were created, because this is about whiteness, okay? If we really want to be honest, America was created to be a white nation. The beauty standard was a blonde, blue-eyed white woman. And so black women have had to deal with the critique of their hair, their lips, and their hips, and all of that. And so when you have to deal with that, you're understanding how deep this thing is. This is the 50th anniversary of King's assassination, the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, but also the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report, which said there were 2 white Americans, 1 white, 1 black. Most black folks who even came into journalism came in after the Kerner Commission, which was all based upon race riots. And so media, the reason this story just boomeranged all around is because media has been the main driver of these racist caricatures throughout American history, and that's why it's such a huge story.
Mm-hmm. What did you think?
I'll be honest, when I saw the headlines, I cringed, and I was like, oh dear, that it does need to be talked about. And I had the sense that maybe there was a bit of a blind spot and an overcorrection of an overcorrection, if you know what I mean. That the history of blackface, as Roland laid out, is the caricature of African Americans as mentally diminished, emotionally immature, subservient, all for to mock African Americans for white entertainment. And maybe this was something that wasn't fully understood. But I did understand the idea of, but I love this character. I love Diana Ross, or any number of African American characters and real people historically. But even there, Megyn, Hollywood also has a disreputable history of hiring white actors to play ethnic minorities because of racist casting practices. So instead of hiring a talented black actor or Native American or Hispanic American, you'd have a white actor putting on dark face to play that character. Even if it was meant to be respectful or thoughtful and reflective, it's still reflected in our culture a non-acceptance of ethnic minorities in media representation.
Not even actor. I know no one wants to talk about Bill Cosby these days, but the reason there was a Black Stuntmen Association is because Bill Cosby was standing next to, when he was doing I Spy, and they had a scene, an action scene, and it was a white man who was putting on blackface to be his stunt double. Bill Cosby said, what? No. Y'all don't go hire somebody black. That's what led to the creation of the Black Stuntmen Association. There was a documentary that was done on them. That was in the 60s. This is American history. We live in constant denial. Today, we're dealing with Confederate statues and monuments, and people are saying, well, okay, this is really no big deal why you're upset. But we have to recognize, over the last, look, I'll be 50 years old November 14th. How many universities have we seen where they've had thug parties and ghetto parties where white fraternities and sororities dressing up in afros and blackface and wearing grills and putting on big chains to mimic African Americans? Well, you want to mimic a rapper, mimic the white rappers out there, dress up like Eminem. But no, that's not exactly what is done. That is a caricature. And when you have that constant assault, what people don't understand is that black people in America, next year will mark the 400th anniversary of the first 20-odd Africans arriving in this country in August of 1619 in Virginia. For 399 years, this constant assault, this degradation, and this demeaning of how we look and how we act. We are just 50 years removed from Dr. King's assassination. In 25 years, Megyn, we will be a majority nation people of color. And white America has to come to grips with that, because now that's going to mean power. That's going to mean economics. It's going to mean that, look, that the notion of what is considered American values will have to be now looked at differently, because people of color will be also making that determination, not just white Americans.
How do we talk about race and our country's history with race and have a real conversation?
Well, I think with information, with sensitivity, and with also the knowledge that as a country, we have struggled, paid a very dear price, and we continue to do, to try to be a country where we have dignity toward each other and different racial groups. So the Halloween costume controversy, to me, the line is actually not that difficult to draw. There's a difference between dressing up as, say, a character with clothing, those types of things, versus racial mockery. And painting blackface. Well, so are you going to do the lips? Are you going to do where does that go? Your producers asked me, well, what would be an example that I think is okay? I think little kids all across America, if they want to dress up like the Disney princesses from Frozen, go for it. Wear the gown, wear the sparkles. But it would certainly be very strange if that turned into some sort of ethnic mockery on that part. Do you see what I'm saying?
Plus, you got to realize how powerful colorism is. Zoe Saldana is a woman of color who got highly criticized because they darkened her skin when she played Nina Simone. Because that went into why couldn't you hire a dark-skinned woman to play the role? Yep. You asked the question, how do you have the conversation? Here's the thing that we don't want to accept. This is what I call an informal gathering. No one person could control who sits in this audience. But we control who we eat lunch with. We control who we go to dinner with. We control who we invite to our houses. And if we really want to be honest, Americans live in silos. White folks stay with white folks, black folks stay with black folks, Latinos stay with Latinos, Asians with Asians, Native Americans with Native Americans. And it's rare when in voluntary situations, we actually cause ourselves, I need to learn more about you. I need to understand you and where you come from, but also asking the question, I don't know. I worked with a guy, Tim Madigan, who grew up in Iowa, didn't see black people until he went to college. All these racial things happen. He never understood why black folks responded the way he did until he wrote the book on the Tulsa race riot. And then he began to interview, and he hears these stories of elderly black people kneeling in their homes and guns put to the back of their head, and they were killed based upon a lie, and how this whole town was destroyed. Tim said, Roland, for the first time, I then understood why black people felt the way they did. And he said, as a white man, I had to force myself to own up to my lack of understanding, my lack of history. And I would say the same thing, Megyn, whether it's you, whether somebody sitting in this audience, being honest that, wait a minute, how did I grow up? And have to go inside of yourself and say, what was I taught? What did my parents teach me? What did my friends teach me? And do I allow people to say things around me that have racial implications and I say nothing? Because I don't really want to upset the apple cart. Let me look at who's in my office. Who's on my staff? Who are executives? I've been in media since I was 14 years old. One of the fundamental problems we have, that white men still run media across the board. I mean, do understand, and this is just, understand how this thing impacts us. When I sat with Ken Jouts, the executive vice president at CNN, I did a pilot. I used the word brother. I was interviewing the guy who later became the first black president. And I talked about health care, and I said, man, that really hurt a brother having to file for bankruptcy because of health insurance. He said to me, hey, be careful using the word brother because we don't want to alienate white viewers and being too ethnic. And I'm going, but that's my story, and I was talking to a black man. But Glenn Beck could use the word brother, and it's perfectly fine. And the fact that he would say that to me in that context is, wait a minute, hold up. Why can't I just be me? Why is it that, okay, you're too black, Roland? Well, how am I too black? Because I am black. And so we have to understand how deep this goes, because now it impacts raises, it impacts promotions, it impacts who we work with. And so we, I think, are in total denial of how deeply embedded race is in the DNA of America and how it impacts so many things that are done in this country. And if we have a discussion and just be honest, and somebody says, look, I don't know, share with me, educate me. That also, I think, what changes it.
And on a personal level, for all of us to challenge stereotypes that we may have about different racial and ethnic groups and say, wait a minute, is that fair? The way that I'm relating to other people or making assumptions, that's a part, I think, of the journey. But the last point is, I can play Diana Ross. I'm sorry, Megyn, you can't.
No. Megyn,
you can.
No, Megyn,
don't.
You can play Diana Ross just like you can play any other character, but you just put on a gown, grab a fan, and then have big hair, you're fine. But that's the mistake that we make when we say, oh, I want to cross that line. Yeah. There are lines, and there's history, and there's pain, and when we acknowledge that, then we can learn and grow from it. But as long as we as Americans live in denial and act as if that stuff does not matter, then we will continue to have this problem in the next 400 years.
Listen, well said. All I can say is, for my part, I have been listening and learning And I'm grateful to both of you to have this conversation here on the set today, and to those who reached out to me via Twitter. I've heard you too. Thank you. Thank you very much, and we'll be right back.